I guess I was fairly apprehensive the whole time that I was flying in combat. And I guess there's good reason to feel that way. I'm there to cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm, and therefore they would like to damage me. And I was 25 years old at that time. Top Gun was really a thrill. I must have done well in actual combat because at the time I was just a lieutenant junior grade, which is a first lieutenant in the Air Force. And so I may have been the very first lieutenant junior grade to go through Top Gun. That was the dream of a lifetime come true. I had wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot just like my dad from the time I was 10 years old. STS-27 was my third launch, and it was only the second launch after the Challenger accident. We were a top secret, classified Department of Defense mission, so to this day, if I told you what we carried, you could never leave this hangar. You'd be... Well, I will never forget. We maneuvered the arm, and Mike Mullane was my arm operator, so he moved the arm over there, and we brought up the television image of the right wing, and I looked at what I was seeing, and I said to myself, we are gonna die. To be an airline pilot, there was mandatory age 60 retirement. I was a NASA astronaut until I was 50 years old. And so I looked at the situation, and I had known a number of Southwest airline pilots. And they were just like me. They were flying because they loved to fly. Well, there's a lot of piloting that goes into it, a tremendous amount of piloting that goes into it, because you're going to wind up passing other airplanes. You're going to get in a duel with another airplane that's fairly closely matched. So there's a ton of satisfaction from doing that. And hey, let's just talk about the racing itself. It's fun to fly low, but it's dangerous. And so the only time I fly low is at the Reno air races. But watching the ground go by you at 400 and 500 miles an hour is pretty darn thrilling, because it's really scooting on by. And that's fun. That's really fun. I had always been fascinated by racing planes because they're sleek, streamlined, and they go real fast. There's that need for speed again, and they're raced around a pylon. And so I determined that I could break the existing altitude record for altitude and horizontal flight for that category of airplane. And in fact, I did that in 1991. And I'm fond of saying that if I have done well as an aviator, it's because my dad was the one who taught me how to fly. And he didn't just teach me how to fly, he taught me the why of it as well. He taught me the aerodynamics behind it, the reasons that you're doing things, not just how to do it, but why you're doing it is also very important.
And you flew
63 missions.
over Europe?
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly over Germany.
Okay.
Almost all over Germany.
Beginning in, I just want to look here from the record. Your first mission was in September of 1944?
Yes, September 1st.
Right, and your last mission was
March 28th, I believe.
1945.
Yes.
And you were a P-51 pilot. I just want to state that.
I was a standard P-51 pilot.
Tell me what it was like, just to begin. When you've written an account of a mission that you flew to Maritzburg, is that the name of it? Maritzburg, Germany, in November of 1944, yes. Which I found very interesting.
Oil refinery.
And explain what it was like to be at altitude and in a P-51, and you described seeing the bomber stream of Army Air Corps heavy aircraft stretching for 100 miles.
That's right.
Could you describe that a little bit to me? What it was like? I mean, what did?
Well, it was so happened that day that we were in the lead fighter group, and when I looked back, I could see this massive armada, this bomber stream, B-17s and B-24s, stretching all the way back to the Dutch coast. And we were well into Germany, a good 100 miles in. And it was an astonishing sight to see 1,000+ planes, plus as many as you could see with the eye, several hundred fighters, which became little dots as they receded into the distance. To see this incredible fighting, bombing, destructive unit as it was coming into Germany to bomb this particular target.
Was the sky filled with aircraft, or was
No.
it stretched out?
No,
Stretched out
it was a stream.
Mhm.
It was a stream, and the bombers would be in one squadron after the other, bombing squadrons, and the fighter groups would be buzzing overhead and on either flank of the bombers, because we were flying about twice as fast as the bombers, and so we could go zigzag above them and on the side and still keep pace with the bomb group that we were assigned to protect.
What was the sound like? I mean, obviously you heard the sound of your own aircraft. Could you hear the sound of the other aircraft?
No. You heard the sound of your own aircraft, and you wanted to hear it forever up there. And I'll describe something if you want.
Please.
Well, many people don't realize that, we carried 2 external tanks of 110 gallons each, and they were to be jettisoned before you went into any combat. And these 2 external tanks didn't have any gas gauges inside the cockpit, as the 3 internal tanks did. So you had to estimate when you were going to run out of either one of the external tanks, because you used them up first, since they were the gas that you needed to go to the target, and coming back from the target you used your internal tanks. Anyway, the external tanks, having no gas gauges, if you were off on your timing and you ran an external tank dry, the engine stopped. And that's what I mean. I wanted to hear that engine all the time, because when that engine stopped and everything was still, it was a lesson you never forgot.
That ever happened to you?
Yes. Once. Only once. It'll never happen again.
And how did you restart the engine?
Oh, you put the nose down, kept the prop to windmilling, and you immediately switched to an internal tank. And the engine, as it was turning over, would pull the gas through from the tank that you had turned to. It was automatic. It was automatic by a turn of the hand. That's your automatic. There were no electronics. It was a low-tech airplane, including no gas gauges for the external tanks.
What was the longest mission you ever flew?
6.5 hours.
And that was sufficient to get you to Berlin and back?
Yes,
or?
there was very little gas left. Yes, inside the tanks, inside the internal tanks.
Let's get back to your decision to enlist. Tell, where were you, first of all, going back, where were you when Pearl Harbor happened, December 7th, 1941? Do you recall that?
Yeah, I was in high school in my graduating class, and I graduated in February 1942.
Where was that?
Brooklyn Tech High School. Brooklyn Tech was a fabulous high school. It was an academic high school, selective student body drawn from all over New York City, and it had also a trades component. For example, I learned foundry. I can do pattern making. I learned to build a house inside one of the big rooms at Brooklyn Tech, machine shop, and so forth. And when I graduated in February 1942, I wasn't 18 and could not enlist as an aviation cadet in the Army Air Corps. So I immediately got a job at the Sperry Gyroscope Company as a machinist assembler. And it was quite surprising what I found at Sperry Gyroscope Company.
What did you find?
I found that the master machinists on my floor, my factory floor, were mostly German.
Really?
And they were ardent Nazis.
Are you
or
serious?
pro-German, I'll put
Okay.
it that way. Very pro-German.
Where was the factory located? Where was this, in New York City?
Flatbush Avenue extension right off the Manhattan Bridge, the big factory, headquarters, world headquarters for Sperry Gyroscope Company.
And these were gyroscopes that were going into
Well, it wasn't gyroscopes that we were working
Okay.
on. I was working on something called a sound locator, which I don't think worked. But Sperry had the contract and we were still producing them in 1942. So as I said, I was working at Sperry Gyroscope Company on a floor that was a hotbed of German pro-sentiment.
Really?
And when I told my my foreman that I was going to enlist, because I worked there until about September of 42, I told him I was going to enlist. He said, "You're crazy. Germany's going to win. You could stay here, and you'll have something to fall back on. You know, you'll have a trade. You can become a master machinist. You're okay. Stay here, and it'll be good for you." And I couldn't wait to get out and enlist.
Where did you actually, when did you actually, you enlisted in September of 42.
Yeah.
Where did you?
No, I enlisted well before that. I was called up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about being called up.
I don't remember exactly, but I believe I got a telegram to report to the Whitehall subway station, downtown side of the tracks. And this part I remember vividly. My father insisted on coming with me. And you know, I was 18. I'd been traveling the subway since I was 8. And I said, "You don't have to, Dad." And he said, "No, I'm coming with you." You know, I said goodbye to my mother at the door, and she hugged me. And my dad took me, we went together on the subway and went to the Whitehall station, subway station, and we saw across the tracks this little group with a man in uniform with them, and crossed over the tracks. And I remember I turned to my dad to shake hands and say, "Okay, Dad," because I didn't want him to come with me to the fellas. That would look like my daddy had to take me to the service. And I shook hands and turned away, and he grabbed me on my shoulder like this, and I looked back, and he was looking down like this, and he whispered to me like my mom did at the door, "Be careful, Billy." And I said, "Sure, you know, I'll be careful." And I turned and walked away, and went to this sergeant with the group, and I was enlisted, I guess.
Had your parents tried to talk you out of enlisting, or were they?
My mother, no, neither one ever tried to talk me out. That we were very pro-British, pro. We were patriotic, and we felt because I'm Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
we felt that. But first, we were American,
Mm-hmm.
and what the Nazis were doing was just unacceptable.
So
I mean, that's the word now.
you were very aware of the situation.
Oh, absolutely. We read the Times and we read the other newspapers, and we heard the radio, and that's a good one. I remember listening to the radio in 1940. Mom and Dad and I were at the kitchen table, and we listened every night to either Gabriel Heater or one of the other announcers telling the news. And I remember important bulletin interrupting and the announcer got on and told about the French collapse in 1940 and the British troops with their backs to the sea at Dunkirk. And we must have looked very, very alarmed, Mom and I, and Dad. He put his one hand on Mom's, one hand on mine, and said, "Don't worry, the British will never give in." But I still remember those words with a chill.
Was your dad an immigrant? Were your mom and dad immigrants?
No, they were American, born here,
Mm-hmm.
Son and daughter of immigrant parents,
Okay.
who were also so appreciative of coming to the United States
Mm-hmm.
after coming from Lithuania and Austria-Hungary,
Mm-hmm.
where they weren't treated well at all,
Mm-hmm.
not at all. And our whole family was extremely patriotic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a patriotism I don't think that's present today. I think we take for granted what this country has.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas then I was acutely aware, because they told me,
Mm-hmm.
grandparents as well as parents, how lucky I was to be an American.
How did you decide to choose the Army Air Corps? Did you always want to fly?
Well, I don't know about always wanting to fly. I know I definitely wanted to fly when my cousin became a fighter pilot. He graduated from Kelly Field in 1942.
Mm-hmm.
Major Sylvan Feld, he had his own squadron. I think it's the 373rd Fighter Squadron in the 9th Air Force, and he used to mind me when I was a kid. When he was 10, 11, I was 5, 6, and so forth. And that's what it was called, minding. Go mind Billy, Sylvan. And he did. He acted almost like my father, and he was only 10 or 11 years old. That's what kind of a fellow he was.
Sort of like an older brother, too.
Yeah, I didn't have any older. I was an only child. Unlike this film, what is it called, Saving Private Ryan,
Mm-hmm.
where if you were the last child or the only child, I guess people would, that the military would send a group out to get you back so that you weren't the last child. What a lot of baloney. There were tens of thousands of only children. They couldn't have done that. But anyway, it was a well-meant picture. I'll put it that way.
So you'd always wanted to fly.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much. Yeah, I used to build model airplanes.
Where did you learn to fly? Tell me about learning to fly in the Army in 1942. Where did you go for flight training?
Well, first, when I was called up, we went to Atlantic City, and Atlantic City wasn't like it is today. There were no casinos then. It was all old-fashioned hotels in a town that was going downhill.
Even then?
Yeah, even then. Anyway, we were there for a couple of months, and then I went to then I went to the University of Pittsburgh for about 2 months, and we were given a lot of mathematics, navigation training, and then after that I went to Nashville, Tennessee, which was the classification center for aviation cadets to determine whether you were qualified to become an aviation cadet. And there was a fair number of washouts there then. And I think most of the guys who were washed out at Nashville was because of psychological reasons.
Really?
More than anything else. Well, some were washed out for physical, of course. If you had a tattoo, you were washed out.
Seriously?
Yes, you say seriously. Today, everybody has a tattoo, it seems, except me. But in those days, a tattoo was considered rather lower class. And I guess I still have that feeling. But I guess if a relative of mine had a tattoo, I'd have to just shake my head and let it go.
But back then, having a tattoo was reason for disqualification to be a...
Yes. Yeah, that's the only reason. There was one particular fellow, I don't want to give his name, he had a tattoo. And I thought he was well qualified, physically and mentally. And he was washed out.
What happened to the guys who washed out? Did they become...
They went into the Air Force as, I guess they made them mechanics or MPs or something on the ground. I don't know what.
So they're washing out for any air activity, for any air crew activity?
Yes, yeah. And that was the start of washout. Oh, to answer your question, after classification, I went to basic training. This is ground training, Maxwell Field, Alabama, for about 2 months. And this was a lot of marching and drilling, and also a lot of academic work, again, navigation work and math and so forth, and learning Morse code and other things.
What was it like? I imagine that was your first time out of New York City, really. Was it first?
No,
no, it
wasn't.
Okay.
No.
Was it your first time down south?
Yes.
Was that a shock? Was it?
Not at Maxwell Field, because I think the railroad terminus was near enough to the airfield so that we didn't see the town to that degree. But I'll get to that point. That's a good one. After Maxwell Field, we went to Union City, Tennessee for primary flight training in biplanes, PT-17 Stearmans, and then after that, and there was a fair number of washouts. I would say 25% of the class washed out there. Went to Newport, Arkansas, and this was called basic flying training in what was then called the Vultee vibrator.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was called, because it shook so much.
Mm-hmm.
And you were asking about the shock of seeing the South as it was then, the poorer places. When that train came into the yard at Newport, Arkansas, and all those kids came running up to the train, barefoot, sores on them, rags,
Really?
and begging, and we would toss them gum or candy or whatever we had. They looked so terrible. It's pictures that you see of darkest Africa now. That's what they looked like.
Real rural poverty.
Rural poverty, and it looked like sickness and malnutrition and bad health. Anyway, that was Newport, Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
After Newport, Arkansas, I was classified as a single engine instead of multi-engine. Otherwise, I had to go into bomber school for advanced flying. Instead, I went to Spence Field, Moultrie, Georgia, where I flew AT-6s, North American AT-6s. After that, for a couple of months, after that, got my wings there, and second lieutenant, went to to operational training in Tallahassee, and then Perry, Florida, and from there I volunteered to go overseas sooner. When a call came just prior to June of '44 for any pilots who wanted to volunteer to go over to the European theater. I wanted to go to the European theater because my cousin was there, and I hoped to join, if possible, his squadron in the European theater. And that was it.
I want to get to that moment, but I want to back up a little bit. And tell me about your first time flying. Tell me about the time you soloed. What was that like?
Oh, that was great. I had about 8 hours, and Mr. Housley, he was a contract pilot, civilian, to train pilots at where was it?
Was that at Maxwell, or was that
No.
at Union City?
Union City, Tennessee. Sorry, and he said we landed, and he said, okay, at one of the outlying fields. There were 3 outlying fields to the main field. He said, okay, Lyons, take her up.
And this would have been a PT-17, a Stearman.
PT-17 Stearman, yes. Oh, gosh. And I did. I took off. I was by myself, and it was exhilarating. It really was. And I flew around. He said, fly around, come back, and do a good landing. So I did the best landing I could. And it was a smooth one. I remember it. Yeah. And that was it.
Mm-hmm. You told me earlier
By the way, did you know, or think about it, that when you flew a single-engine fighter plane, your first flight in that plane was solo? Okay, that's all.
You told me earlier that you got your pilot's wings before you actually got your driver's license. You actually didn't even know how to drive.
That's correct. Oh, I wasn't on the mission that particular. This is Steeple Morden, England, where we had our base. I wasn't on the mission that day, but I went to the briefing anyway because I planned to go into London that day, and I was dressed in, the uniform, pinks and greens. Clearly, I wasn't on the mission dressed in a flight suit. And at the briefing, as I was about to sit down, my CO, Major Elder, came over to me, and he said, "Look, you're not on a mission. I want you to go back to the barracks right away. I want you to get my musette bag, which is like a pocketbook, only for men." Anyway, I said, "I can't." And he said, "Take the Jeep." And I said, I said, "I can't." And he said, "Why not?" "I don't know how to drive." And he was stunned. And you're flying P-51s in combat, and you can't drive an automobile? And I said, "No, I'm from Brooklyn. I used to take the subway. I took the streetcar, or I walked." He wouldn't hear any of it. He said, "By the time I get back, you better get checked out with Sergeant Schultz. Tell him I said so." And in the Jeep, and I did, and I learned to drive an automobile on the runway after everybody took off on the mission, on the runway at Steeple Morden, going back and forth. I had a wonderful time that day, better than going to London. Anyway, that was it.
Getting back to the training, though, I've read statistics about how hazardous flight training was. A lot of guys, there were a tremendous number of accidents.
Tens of thousands of accidents.
And accidents in flight training, accidents were almost a daily occurrence. Was that your experience?
Of course, a daily occurrence. Sure. Something from somebody would always go wrong. Yeah. It was an accident-prone activity.
Did you lose a lot of guys?
I remember 2 who were killed in flight training. But there were a lot of accidents, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, well, I recall at Spencefield in night flying. This, when you're up there in the dark and trying to see what's going on, and there are different quadrants around the airfield, and you're circling there at different levels of altitude. Going up, you're going past somebody. Coming down, you may be going past somebody when you're called in or going out. It was hazardous, and I felt it then.
And there's no radar, of course, in these planes. No collision avoidance systems.
Oh God, no. No, you have better in an automobile today, collision avoidance.
Where was it that you actually learned to fly the P-51?
Oh, I hadn't flown I've flown P-40s
Okay.
in operational training in Perry, Florida. And when I went to England, I hadn't flown a P-51, but I was going to be assigned to a squadron, either flying P-47s or P-51s. And I was sent to, I think it was Goxhill on the English coast. And I got 6-7 hours, yes, 6.5 hours in a P-51, and then I went to my combat group.
Was it difficult learning to fly a new aircraft? Could you tell me?
The P-51 was the easiest plane I ever flew.
Really?
Except for one thing, the first takeoff, because even more than the P-40, the torque when the engine is going down the runway causes you to shift to the left, and the P-51 had 50% more horsepower, so the torque was much more than the P-40, and I almost went off the runway the first time that I flew out of Steeple Morden. This was a training flight, because you didn't go up right away. You had 2 or 3 training flights before you went into combat. And that's why it is said that P-51 pilots have a compensatory right leg in order to push the right rudder in and prevent the plane from going off the runway. Now I learned how to use the trim tabs better, but at that time I didn't realize much on trim tabs to help going down the runway straight as I did later.
Mm-hmm. But you're saying it was an easy aircraft to fly?
Easy. It was perfect. You flew like a bird. You became a part of the plane,
mm-hmm.
and you didn't even think about what you had to do. You were the bird,
mm-hmm.
and the P-51 responded flawlessly, I thought, especially without the wing tanks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the jettisonable wing, because that slowed you down and made you
mm-hmm.
Clumsy in the air. But once you dropped those tanks, boy, that was a good plane.
A big improvement over the P-40, in your opinion?
Much. Faster, more maneuverable, responsive, everything.
Mm-hmm. Pilots really fell in love with their aircraft, it sounds
A
like.
lot of them did. Yeah, well, in love may be too strong a word, but we sure liked it.
Tell me about arriving in England in I guess in September or August, sometime in the summer of 1944. You arrived there after the Normandy invasion?
Right after, yes.
What were the conditions in wartime England? What greeted you when you landed in England? Do you recall?
Well, I was flown by myself with a load of rockets in a C-54. They
Mm-hmm.
were putting, I guess, these volunteers like me in anything that would go over there. I've flown from Mitchell Field
Mm-hmm.
and landed at Prestwick.
So you flew over. You didn't go by ship. You actually you flew
No,
in a C-54.
came back by ship,
Okay.
but flew there. Landed at Prestwick. I was immediately put on a train to Goxhill, where we flew some old P-51s for training purposes to acclimate us to it. And I found England wonderful. yes. The people, that what determines how you feel about a place. I thought they were courageous, living under bombardment in London especially, and never giving in. I admired the English so much, and I was proud to be fighting along with them.
Now, you arrived there in 44.
Yeah.
Just, were you ever worried about being bombarded by the Germans? At that point,
No.
the Luftwaffe at that point was certainly on the defensive.
Definitely.
Were you ever worried though? But you must have taken.
We had a few buzz bombs come over Steeple Morden, and but they weren't considered that much of a threat. We went into the little bomb shelters that were in the airfield, peppered around the airfield. But I remember being in London several times when the V2s came over, and the next block to me, once when I was awakened, and there was a whoosh, and boom, and I went back to bed because I wasn't hit. And that was it. I know that sounds, but that's what you did.
Tell me about your living conditions at Steeple Morden. Where did you live? You lived in a Quonset hut?
It wasn't a Quonset hut. It was like a little, a square Quonset hut. I'll put it that way. It was the equivalent, but square. It was old WAAF, WAAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, female maybe, British terminology, that the WAAF, it was called the WAAF site, S-I-T-E, that our squadron lived in. And there was one thing about it, because it was originally built for women only, there were no urinals. So I remember that. But it was very comfortable, I would say. We had clean sheets. I mean, you would go over in a mission, and it would be life and death, and you come back, and you'd be sleeping in clean sheets. And I thought the contrast was extraordinary, of safety and cleanliness, and over there, death and destruction. Over Germany.
Do you recall your first mission?
Yeah, I do.
Tell me about your first mission. That would have been September 1st of 1944.
I was very nervous my first mission, I admit it. And I ate a good breakfast, and I was very nervous, and we didn't meet any enemy aircraft that day, but there was a lot of flak, and when you try to, when you see flak, this is, I was forewarned what to do by when you see where the flak is bursting, the batteries of flak comes up in fours, the burst. You try to throw off the aim of the German batteries below that are sending up the flak by jinking, flying. If the camera can see me, right? Going like this.
Unpredictably.
Okay, and doing that, but staying in general formation, combat formation, spread apart, but next to the bombers that we're protecting, and looking around, making sure where enemy fighters are not approaching, and listening to the radio as to any instructions, and looking at your gallonage in internal tanks, and thinking about the timing for the external tanks, and looking at your coolant and your airspeed and your RPM and everything, and doing 50 things at the same time, and being nervous, my stomach started to betray me, and I had to throw up. And throwing up in an oxygen mask, because we're on oxygen all the way, since we weren't pressurized, of course, you can't throw up in the oxygen mask. It'll fill up and you're gonna. So the first heave, I ripped up and I spewed all up, and going with my left hand, and then immediately putting it back on, taking a good deep breath, and then the next one, like that, going back and forth like that. It was going all over the plane, and it's 60 below and less inside there because it's not pressurized or heated.
And you were flying at 25,000 feet, 30
25, 30, 25, 26, 27,000 feet. And it would freeze instantly. So, but I was most glad that nobody could see me. They couldn't see me. So I felt that was good. But when we came back, as we go lower altitude, it starts to melt all over the place. And I land. The crew chief jumps on the wing, pull the canopy. I pull the canopy back, and I said, "It's my first mission, I said, I'm so sorry. I'll help you clean it up. I'm sorry." And he looked down, and he said, "I've seen worse." And I felt wonderful. I felt wonderful. And nobody ever said anything to me about it. He must have kept his mouth shut, or maybe he told other crew chiefs, but no other pilot knew about this. And I never threw up again. And that was my first mission.
I'm sure that was actually pretty a common occurrence, actually.
Well, I don't know if it was that common. I think defecating and urine was more common, which I never did. I never did. No. Once I overcame that first bad situation, I felt almost invincible.
Mm-hmm.
I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because others had too. I'd be all right.
Once again, in the account you wrote about that November mission, you described all the layers of clothing you had to wear.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about it, but you did most of your flying at, which, as you said, at 50 below zero, 60 below zero.
Oh yeah, it could get less than that.
Yeah, I mean, how did you? It seems almost remarkable to me being able to function at such cold temperatures.
Well, your heart is beating pretty well,
mm-hmm.
and that helps. And I can just tell you about the layers on gloves alone.
Mm-hmm.
The first is the silk.
Mm-hmm.
No, first is the chamois, then the silk, and then the big leather gauntlet.
Mm-hmm.
3 layers.
Mm-hmm.
3 layers of socks. Your long johns over your underwear, your shirt, your pants, the flight suit
Mm-hmm.
over that.
Was the flight suit lined too, or is that just so?
No,
okay.
it wasn't lined.
Okay.
If it was lined, you wouldn't have your mobility.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't wear the big sheepskin coats that were worn in the bombers,
Mm-hmm.
where the gunners would have mobility and could move around in them, but we could not. We were tightly packed in. And you have your parachute on, and you have a Mae West over it,
Mm-hmm.
over the
Over the chute.
Wait a minute, I forget which came on first. Anyway, you have a Mae West and you have a parachute, a seat pack sitting on. You're pretty cozy in that, and your body heat. If you're young and you're healthy, and your heart is beating well, it was enough to keep you warm. And as soon as you saw enemy aircraft, or even flak sometimes if it was that heavy, boy, you became a man who was perspiring, despite the altitude and the cold. I remember I perspired after those combat sessions.
You wrote about the November mission in '44. Was that your most
November 26th.
Right, November 20. Was that your most memorable mission, though? Was that why you wrote about that particular mission, or did you write about that mission because you thought that was the most representative, or?
No, I was asked to write about it by Bill Marshall, who was writing a book on the history of the 355th Fighter Group, and this was one of the largest aerial combat missions of the war, and that's why I wrote about it.
What was your own most memorable mission of those 60?
Oh, this was memorable, believe me.
Okay.
There were, I guess...
Can you still recall them all now? So, I mean,
no.
60 years later?
I can't recall all of them. But there were several memorable missions. That was one of the most memorable because we fly in flights of 4 as a combat team, and number 3 and number 4 had a mid-air collision right before my eyes, and so that's always in my mind.
Sure. And you also shot down an ME-109.
Yeah, 2 ME-109s I shot down. Plus I damaged a jet, ME-262 in the air. All of those were memorable, yeah.
How long, when you were actually engaged in aerial combat, how long did these engagements last?
They last minutes, seconds. And the guy who shoots first usually wins. And the guy who takes the initiative usually wins. That's why we were so thankful about General Doolittle's directive when he came on board, because before that, the fighter planes were required to stay with the bombers until the Germans attacked. That was absurd. The Germans had the initiative then. This way, Doolittle said, "You see them? You attack on sight." And that was a much more intelligent way, much better strategy of being a fighter, to be a fighter pilot, because you took the initiative, and we protected the bombers better. Fewer bombers were lost, and also we got more shot down. So.
In the account you wrote, you describe almost as if when you were in the middle of these aerial combats, you thought of yourself as fighting a machine. You didn't really think about the other pilot, did you? Or did you think about the machine? You were fighting a machine, or were you fighting another pilot, or was there no time to even think about that?
I didn't think of it as a personal matter of another fellow. I was shooting down a plane, and it was on my second shoot down where when I was behind him, I was behind the plane and getting very close to within 50 feet literally, and firing my guns, and the pilot was clearly trying to get out, and I think the bullets were ripping him to pieces. And when, as I think I said in describing it before, when you see the human form, it's quite different, and than if you're firing at a plane. You're killing somebody, and that was a part of it then. But he shot at me first. Now, I don't mean to make it a flip remark about it, but that's exactly what had happened in that particular combat. He had the drop on me, and I should have been dead, but I wasn't.
Do you recall what it was like when the jets arrived? When the German jets arrived, was that a real? Was that a?
Well, we were astounded by their speed, and everybody wanted to get a jet.
That would
If
have
we
been the
possibly
262, the Messerschmitt 262.
Yeah, ME-262.
Did that show up?
Far in advance of our planes.
Did that show up, make its first appearance while you were flying, or had that already appeared before?
It had already appeared
Okay.
by the time I had damaged the jet, the ME-262 jet that I was firing at.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, they had appeared a few months before.
And
Yeah.
did it take a while to figure out how to combat them, how to fight them, or?
Well, you improvised. Whatever you had to do, it depended upon where they were shooting from, where they were coming from. Were you higher? Were they in a dive? Every combat was different, but insofar as trying to fire at a plane that could go another 200 miles faster than you could go, the only way you could get them is if they were in a turn, and that was what happened with me. This ME-262 was turning into the bomber stream in front of me, quite a distance in front of me, but I could lead him with my guns and try to fire ahead of him so he would fly through the bullet stream. And I got a few strikes, and as soon as I did, he leveled off and went up and away. My gosh, we couldn't fly that way at altitude, above 20,000 feet. And he just effortlessly pulled away at altitude. And he could outrun our bullets. He was faster
Really?
than we were.
What were the speeds that you were conducting most of this combat in? How fast were you flying when you were actually in a dogfight?
Well, our top speed, straight and level, without tanks, of course, without external tanks, was about 425 or so miles an hour. We could dive almost. We would hit the supersonic point, and the whole plane would shake, and it felt to me when I hit that point in diving as if the canopy was going in and out.
Really?
And you had to pull back, otherwise the plane would fall apart. We were not. We couldn't go through the sound barrier. We'd break up.
But in a dive, you could reach 500 miles an hour.
Oh, easily.
Really?
We could reach 720.
Really?
That's the speed of sound. That's the sound barrier.
Okay.
And if you reach that, you were very foolish. It was way past the red line and the wire that holds the throttle, going past the red line. So no, I never reached 720, but I've seen it hit 600. And actually, you're not looking at your airspeed when you're in combat. You're only looking at what you're firing at. And there is the tendency, if he's going down ahead of you, no matter how fast he's going, try to catch up and fire as close as possible to him. So sometimes you could go faster than you should.
What was the shape of the Luftwaffe by 1940? This was the second half of 1944, early 1945.
Yeah, they were on the defensive, I would say. But they, on November 26th, they put up a good 400 plus airplanes, and we had several hundred up on that mission. And they tried to attack along the bomber stream where they thought there was a gap in the fighter protection. And they would try to attack in numbers greater than we were. And on that particular mission, we were, 8 planes, 2 flights, where we had something like 70, 75 coming toward us and from the side. I must my flight leader, Fred Haviland, uh, boy, he just went right into where they were most dense. And I, of course, following, protecting his tail, because I was his wingman that day. And we blew them up, not physically blew them apart, but they spread out, and their attack was blunted quite a bit. And then we had the swirling around of the combat where Fred got 2 and I got 1. And my life was saved by Lieutenants Barney Barab and Kelly, who had a mid-air collision and were killed.
You described that in the account. Basically, I guess one of the planes was flying erratically, right?
Yeah, Kelly was. We didn't know why. It could have been his oxygen was bad coming through, something, but his plane had oil all over it on the fuselage. Maybe something was going wrong. I don't know, but he was flying erratically, wasn't answering the call on the radio. We all 3 of us tried, and when Barab went up close to him to try to look and see what was going on inside the cockpit, Kelly just swerved into him, and they blew up. Yeah.
What was the how many did you? I assume you had. Well, you had many close scrapes in the air. I assume.
Yeah, not just in the air.
Yeah.
Well, I say yeah, it's in the air.
Yeah.
Of course.
What were some? You care to tell me any of the close scrapes you had, or in the air, or for that matter, on the ground?
Well,
what was the thing you feared most?
Flak. 20mm flak flying across airfields and strafing. That was deadly. That's how we lost most of our planes.
To flak, to ground fire.
Ground fire flak. Yeah. We lost more due to ground fire flak and aerial flak than we did enemy aircraft. Yeah.
I think this might be a good point to mention that one of the statistics you included that the 357th had about 45% casualties among the pilots. Is that right? You said that
roughly
of the original cadre of 28 pilots,
about 70%.
Of the original 28 pilots.
Yeah. Were casualties in one way or another. Some became POWs, but the loss rate was very high.
And you said among the replacement pilots.
The replacement pilots, I was a replacement pilot. We had about a 45% loss rate, casualties. Some were got out in chutes and were evaders, a few, and got away on the ground, usually over France if it happened. But overall, we lost 1 out of 3. Dead, KIA. There are still some MIAs, never been found. And they probably went into the North Sea.
I guess you flew over the North Sea on the way to Germany.
Oh, you had to, on every mission. Yeah, North Sea or the English Channel. I hated flying over water.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did your plane ever get hit?
A little bit, not much. Just little pieces of flak, a hole here and there, not much. I was very lucky. Yeah.
What was the most vulnerable part on a P-51?
Coolant. You lost your coolant, that coolant tube. If a bullet hit that, you had about a minute's flying.
Really?
Tops.
And you had the radiator was located I actually had that big air scoop right under the wings, right?
I guess it was. Yeah. Why?
No, your radiator was right behind you. I guess
underneath and behind. Yeah.
So the idea was to protect your radiator at all costs.
I don't know about protecting the radiator.
Uh-huh.
I just knew you had to fly properly and improvise and do what was necessary in order to defeat the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I never thought about a radiator. I never thought about any part of the plane except my instruments
Okay.
and how it felt to fly.
Mm-hmm.
Radiator. Now you tell me. Shit.
Armchair pilot here. You asked me to ask you about Dresden.
Oh,
Which is a
yeah.
controversial topic. The
Yeah.
bombing of Dresden in February of 1945.
Yeah.
When the British and the American Air Forces basically carpet bombed the city. Or firebombed the city, wherever you want to.
I don't think we ever carpet bombed.
Okay.
No. We always went after a target,
Okay.
a specific target.
Mhm.
We were not out to destroy civilian infrastructure.
Mhm.
That was a collateral, as they call it, damage
Mm-hmm.
to destroy civilian infrastructure. And you see how the cities looked. I'd say top 40 cities in Germany looked after the war. They were decimated, and there was a reason. We had a remarkable bomb site. Hear me through on this.
Okay.
The Norden bomb site. It was tested over the Mojave Desert, and as I understand it, tested over the Mojave Desert, still air at 10,000 feet, and they were able to drop a bomb into a square 100 feet on a side, something like 90% of the time. 10,000 feet, still air, nobody firing at you, no flak, and they were finally, with this remarkable bomb site, dropped. Okay. Can I go?
Sure.
Okay.
No.
And, all right, now it's Europe. And there are enemy planes attacking the bombers. And we're at 20, 25, 28,000 feet. And there are crosswinds. It's still air over the Mojave Desert. A crosswind can be 75 miles an hour, pushing you to the side. And that particular crosswind, at the ground, it may be 25 miles going this way. Once those bombs are dropped, even via the wonderful Norden bomb site aiming, that bomb is gravity determines how it goes, the wind determines how it goes, and they found out that only 5% of the bombs dropped hit the target. All right? So how come the targets were always destroyed if only 5% of the bombs hit, of the aimed bombs hit the target? Well, if you have 1,000 planes, one squadron after the other, and these planes, bombers, are spread out, the lead bomber a couple of, about 100 feet away, the two wing bombers, then behind them a third set of the squadron, 12 or odd planes, and in squadron after squadron after squadron. If 5% hit, what happens with the other bombs? Sometimes 90% of the bombs go to the right or to the left or somewhere else around, and everything around it is destroyed. So that's why the Norden bomb site was so astonishingly accurate that the targets were always destroyed, despite the fact that only 5% of the given bombs hit the target. Did I make myself clear?
I think so.
Oh, you think so?
I think so.
What? Ask the question. What's the question? Because
go ahead.
Then reconnaissance flies over
Mm-hmm.
the next day if it's clear, and I didn't mention another thing, sometimes you come to the target and it's overcast. All right? It was said, I think I mentioned, that the meteorologists were 100% accurate in predicting the weather 50% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, you see an overcast. What is the bomb? The colonel or whoever he is in the lead bomb directing the mission, what does he do? If it's overcast and you can't see the target, he goes to a secondary target, which may be clear, okay? Or it's just patchy clouds and he thinks we can get that target. He drops the bombs. No bombs in bombers were carried back to the base. So what do you think happened to the bombs if they weren't carried to the base when even the secondary target was obliterated by clouds?
I give up.
Yeah, well, it's up to you to figure that one out. They weren't taken back to England and landing with bombs.
But anyway, you asked, getting back to Dresden.
Oh, Dresden, I'm sorry.
That's okay. But
Okay.
You have some very strong feelings about Dresden.
Yes, I think it was a legitimate target. They had the Zeiss company, instrument maker, for all of Germany's war machine, for the airplanes, for the submarines, for tanks, or for, well, maybe not for tanks, but for factories. All the instrumentation was made by Zeiss, practically. They were the leading instrument maker of Germany. That was a legitimate target. There was even a poison gas factory in Dresden. Fortunately, it wasn't used, but poison gas, I mean. But it was a legitimate target, and also it was the largest marshalling yard feeding the Russian front. Railroad marshalling yard feeding supplies, munitions, troops to the Russian front. A very valid target. And there should be no apologies about bombing the city of Dresden, especially after the Germans carpet bombed Rotterdam with virtually no aerial defenses, carpet bombed Warsaw, no defenses, destroyed utterly Coventry, and bombed England for 50 days straight, just dropping bombs willy-nilly over the city of London, definitely trying to destroy civilians more than anything else. And to have to apologize for the bombing of Dresden, a legitimate target, when the Germans were doing their nefarious bombing first, I think it's not right.
Mm-hmm. I just want to clarify here, though. You said you actually did not fly on that mission, though, right?
I didn't, but I wouldn't apologize if I had.
Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier about the very high casualty rates. 45%. The replacement pilots. Even worse than the
1 out of 3.
1 out of 3. Did you think you were going to make it through? Did you?
You didn't
You're
think
20.
that way.
You were 20 years old. You couldn't.
Right.
Did you think you were going to make it through?
Well, I knew the math, and I felt if I did what I did my best, I could depend upon myself and my fellow pilots, because we fought for each other. We did. We did. That was the most important. Never let the other guys down. And I felt I could make it, but it wasn't top of my mind. And I don't think it was top of mind of the other pilots either. I don't think we thought in terms of we would die. I think we thought in terms of how many of the enemy we could shoot down. Planes, and not guys, planes. Enemy fighter planes. And I think that's the way younger people think. At least they did in my squadron.
I mean, by 1944, when you arrived in the European theater, it was pretty clear that the tide had obviously turned, to the Allies, and you knew the war was won.
No,
No.
no, we did not,
Mm-hmm.
because there were more aerial combat. Because now with the P-51 we could fly deep into Germany. There was far more aerial combat and far more bombing and flak coming up than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't look to us like the end, and especially what happened with the Battle of the Bulge. We were astonished.
Mm-hmm.
We thought that Patton and Montgomery and so forth were going to be having an easier time of it going
Mm-hmm.
into Germany.
Tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, do you recall? Did you? The bulge lasted what, 2 or 3 weeks, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, and
Were
a
you,
strange thing happened. I was flying. Did I fly Christmas Day? I think I did.
yes, Christmas 1944,
Okay,
and that was to Verdun.
and there should be a gap after that. Is there a gap of?
There's a 5-day gap.
Okay, what happened there? When I was flying over Belgium, we were flying over Belgium going in, and my cockpit started to fill up with smoke. So I didn't think I could make it back across to England, and I circled down, and there was an airfield there, and it was on our side. I felt I could have been wrong, because we were right over the battle lines, the ground battle lines, and it was an RAF airfield. Lucky. I landed there. They fixed my plane, and I flew off the next morning, and that airfield was captured in the context of the Battle of the Bulge. And when I flew, we were supposed to land at Reims that day and provide ground support for the troops with the 355th Fighter Group.
Mm-hmm.
So I landed at Reims, and I'm the only one from my group there. And so I thought I should wait there. And 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, and I told the tower at Reims, contact back at Steeple Morden, let them know I'm here. They never did, or didn't get acknowledged or something. And so I stayed at Reims for about 5 days, and then I flew back myself, because I felt something's wrong here. And nobody told me what to do or anything, and I flew back to Steeple Morden, and I began my missions again.
What did they think of? Did they assume that you've been lost?
They thought I was lost. They thought that when I landed that the airfield was taken over, I was done. That's it.
You stopped flying in March of 1945. I guess
Yes.
after you 300 hours.
Yeah, that was a tour,
Mm-hmm.
300 combat hours, and then you could go back to the States on leave for a month,
Mm-hmm.
and it would take you about a month to get processed, and the boat going back, and then a month in the States, at home, and then a month coming back. So that's 3 months. So figure it out. Let's say it's 1st of April now. April, May, June. So I'm at home. Well, actually, I was at Fort Dix that day, getting processed, and I was told that that no more pilots are going over, no more fighter pilots are going over to the European theater.
This would have been May. This is May of 1945.
May 8th, I think, was
Okay,
VE Day.
This is the day of VE Day. Gotcha.
Right after, sometime right after that, when I was being processed.
Mm-hmm.
but I had the option, I was told, I could go to Japan, or if I wished, because he looked over my record, he said, I have a lot of points, and you could be discharged on points. And I had a lot of medals, you know, and you got a certain number of points for each medal and for whatever. I could be discharged, and did I know about this GI Bill that had been passed? No. You could go to college and have everything paid for to any college in the recognized college in the United States, and get $75 a month living expenses. So I went to MIT, because I never could have afforded that myself, you know, the cost of going to college then at MIT. And that's what I did, because I figured I don't think I'd be needed in Japan. We were doing very well over there too. And
So when did you muster out?
must have been August of 45. Yeah.
Where were you when you heard about the atomic bomb, about the bomb on the Hiroshima bomb?
I think I was. I'm not sure. I was either in Boston or Brooklyn. I'm not sure. But I know when I heard about it, I thought, wow, I wish we had had that sooner. And I'm glad we got it before the Germans. Because if they had gotten it first, we'd have been goners.
You told me that you stopped flying. You never flew again after you.
That's right.
After your last mission.
was my last flight.
I'm just curious.
Flying a plane, I mean.
Yeah, right. I'm just curious. So after flying over Europe so many times in a combat role, when did you ever finally get to Europe as a tourist? And what was it like to visit the places that you had flown over? Did you ever have that experience?
Yes.
What was that like?
Leipzig.
Yeah, what was that like? Tell me about that. What year was that, first of all? And
Let me add, 1989. I think it was 1998 or 97, something like that.
Okay.
I forget. I went to Leipzig. Went to Leipzig to reprivatize a piece of property that my father and my aunt had bought in the 1920s. It is an apartment house that you can see on that wall, which says Palais Lyons. And Leipzig was the fur capital of the world in the 1920s. The Russians would send their furs in to the wholesalers, the world wholesalers at Leipzig, who would distribute the furs to the buyers who came over from New York and Paris and wherever they came from.
was your dad in the fur trade, or was your family?
No,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
my dad was not. My aunt worked for a furrier in New York who told her, you must buy property in Germany because you can get, for pennies on the dollar almost, large properties that someday will be worth more. And so she and my dad bought this through an intermediary that was set up by her boss, the furrier, bought this apartment house in Leipzig.
This was during the Weimar years of the rampant inflation.
Good,
Gotcha.
yes, exactly, the inflation. And I couldn't reprivatize the property when Hitler took it over. It was on 86 Karl-Liebknecht-Strasse, and when Hitler took over Germany, they changed the street name to 86 Adolf Hitler Strasse, and then when the Germans took over East Germany, Leipzig was in that area, it was changed to 86 Joseph Stalin Strasse.
You mean when the Russians took over? Gotcha.
Yeah, Russians took over.
Right.
What did I say?
You said the Germans again.
Oh, I'm
okay,
sorry.
Gotcha.
Russians took over.
Gotcha.
Okay. So, I'll cut it short.
No, that's okay.
I got a a gentleman over there, a young man, to be my representative, and he told me that after the wall came down, because you couldn't reprivatize until the wall came down. This was, I think, 1989, and it took 8 years with 4 different judges before I was able to get a settlement or a proposed settlement on the property. And I went over there. My representative said he had 3 bids for this apartment house. My mother, that my dad and my aunt bought, and I was the ultimate heir, and I had to prove it, of course, and all of that. And we went before this notar. He's the equivalent to sort of like a judge who can sign off on buying and selling property. And the buyer, a developer, he wasn't an ordinary realist, he was a developer. And is it agreed, the notar said, that you'll sell to this man? And I said yes. And is it agreed that you'll buy? He said yes, that he'll buy it. And then he said, but wait, I would like Mr. Lyons to come in with me. Won't you, Mr. Lyons? And you will make far more on the property if you come in with me than if you just get a price for the building as it stands now. Because I'm going to convert it into condominiums, and it'll be worth many times as much, and you'll be my partner. No, I said, this is what our agreement was, and you pay me and I'll give you the property. Well, I have to think about it and so forth. He reneged right on the spot. So I said, well, you think it over. And I told my rep, go to the second bidder, and I'm going home. And I went home one day. However, when I went home, I got the telephone call from my rep. He signed the paper, and we got the funds for the property. But when I was over there for a couple of hours that morning in Leipzig, I was taken around by my representative and another fellow through Leipzig. Our property was located within the ring, and the fur district was in the ring too.
What's the ring? The ring is
that was the medieval fortification line around. The historic district is within the ring of most every city, that medieval city in those. Okay. And went on this street, which was the Fur Street years ago, the Furrier Street. And I saw these houses, these buildings, these offices, 2, 3-story buildings on this street. And etched into there were the names of the owners. Koplowitz, Bernheim, Landau. Jewish names, all through this street. And I said to my rep, well, what's happened with all of these business owners? What happened to their businesses after? What happened to them? Half knowing what happened to them. And he said, well, my parents told me, he was a young man, my parents told me that the Jews left so quietly, and bit by bit they left, that it wasn't even noticed that they left. And that was the story that he had. His parents didn't know. Apparently, nobody knew that the Jews were being herded onto those trains, those cattle cars. That was the story, and that gave me a chill too. God. Anyway, the property wasn't damaged that much. You could still see a lot of pock marks in the facade, which you can't change. They have to be left as they are in the facade
Pockmark.
because it's in the ring.
You mean pockmarks
Yeah.
caused by American bomb, by
By
shrapnel,
American
by shrapnel?
bombs, yes. And I knew when I was flying over Leipzig that properties down there, I didn't care, of course. So that's that story. You asked how I felt about Germany. If he hadn't said that, I would have felt much better, because he was a very decent young man who I don't think had that Nazi desire to kill Jews, that insane desire to kill a whole group of people that you didn't even know. They weren't attacking the Nazis. My gosh. Anyway, that's my feelings.
Well, I just want to, we've been talking now for about over an hour already.
Then you must be tired.
I'm great. I'm great. No. I can. A few questions to wrap up. First of all, tell me just for the record, tell me a little bit about your life after the war. You went to MIT.
Yeah.
What did you get your degree in?
Business and Engineering Administration. I started out as an aeronautical engineer, but I found I wasn't that interested in the application of engineering. I was good in the pure sciences, math and physics and so forth, but I really liked the humanities so much more. History and English. And I took a course in marketing, and I didn't know what that was until I took the course. And you had to write a thesis to graduate from the business and engineering discipline at MIT. And I wrote my thesis under the sponsorship of the New England Confectionery Company, which was located down the street from MIT on Mass Avenue. And they gave me $400 to expenses. This was fantastic. And these theses were on 3x5 cards outside a bulletin board that you picked off to write on. And most of the assignments were done by cooperative big corporations. GE would have a thesis, and General Motors and IBM. I liked this little one on a yellow piece of 3x5 from the New England Confectionery Company because it intrigued me. It said, the assignment was how to increase sales of 5-cent candy, how to increase sales and profits of 5-cent candy bars. I took that thesis and I called on 400 families in the city of Cambridge. That was a really large number to call.
Sure.
There wasn't that kind of research done in those days. But I thought, that's the way I'll be able to tell what to do. I'll find out what the candy buyers like. I started out with about 40 some odd candy, they were called bars then. They weren't all bars, but that was the trade name. There was Hershey's, and there was Planters Peanuts, and there was Jujubes, and there was Canada Mints.
I assume these were Necco wafers, right?
Wait a minute, okay, and Necco wafers. Of course, New England Confectionery Company made Necco wafers. All right. I found by my first 20 or 30 calls that I could reduce the number to about 10 or 11, and get 95% of the market.
10 or 11, you'd reduce
different brands.
Okay.
Instead of 40. Okay, so I had these 10, and I'd go and in those days, I'd knock on a door. I'd be invited in. I would tell them I'm doing a a study at MIT, and I wonder if you could assist me. I have a few questions to ask, and I'm doing it on candy. Oh, yeah, come on. Today, you can't knock on a door. There's burglar alarms and
They
there's
would call the cops. They would call the cops.
Yeah, but they would invite me to eat sometimes. I would spend an evening, which I could ill afford to do because I had so much hunger. But it was, anyway, that's the research I did. And I found out, why do you buy Hershey's? Well, I like the taste. That's all. I like the taste. Oh, it's, you know. Well, suppose I offered you twice as much Planters peanuts for a nickel as they now get. Would you switch for that great amount? No. I like Hershey's. Yeah. Well, suppose Hershey's was not a nickel, it was a dime, and everything else was a nickel. What would you do? I found out that, again, 90% would stick with the Hershey's. I like that. That's my favorite. I'd lose 10%. And that was consistent. The Planters Peanuts guy, he didn't want Hershey, he didn't want Skybar, he wanted peanuts. And he'd pay the extra nickel, 90%, sometimes it's only 80%, but the overwhelming number would pay the higher amount.
To get what they wanted.
To get what they wanted, no matter what the other guys did, the other brands did. So my conclusion was, how to increase sales and profits of 5-cent candy bars? Increase the price to 10 cents. And I recommended this to Necco because it would have more than doubled their profits, actually, after you figure packaging and everything, you know. And I wrote my thesis on that basis. And I got honors, and I decided, because of the way Necco was advertising...
Did they follow your advice?
Wait a minute.
Okay.
The way Necco was advertising, they weren't talking about taste in a way that I thought they were talking about the number of pieces you got and all that. And I said, you got to describe the flavors, you got to do this and talk taste. And I thought, oh, I know what I'm doing, you know. I really didn't know as much as I should, but I had the essence of it. In other words, find out what the customer wants and give it to him. That's the essence of marketing. And they weren't doing it. So I thought I'd go into advertising. And 25 years later, I got the Necco account. Believe it or not. Advertising account. Mm-hmm. But then I went into advertising.
And what firms did you work for?
Benton and Bowles, J. Walter Thompson.
These are all big firms.
They were then. Yeah. I don't know where they are now with the computers and things like, and YouTube and whatever they call it. J. Walter, Ted Bates. Mm-hmm. Those are the three largest.
Getting back to the war,
yeah.
A couple of questions. How do you think World War II changed the country?
This country?
Yes, this country.
I think the most massive change afterwards was in education. It gave an opportunity to guys like me.
About the GI Bill now.
The GI Bill, I thought it educated a large swath of American men, mostly, that would not have had a chance at a college education. And I think it enriched our country enormously. I think the years after the war gave a sense of, well, during the war there was, I thought, great patriotism and a feeling about the country that was heightened, although no greater than, about being patriotic, no greater than my grandparents or my parents, who were recent immigrants. But I thought there was a feeling about being an American that was very strong, and a lot of pride in being an American, and a lot of pride in what was done in World War II. in the actions that we took, because it wasn't a sure thing that we were going to win. And when I went in 1942, you know, when I graduated right after high school, I went to Sperry, of course, but I was seeing the Japanese were taking over the South Pacific,
Sure.
bordering on Australia, and the Germans had swept through all of Europe. It was definitely not a sure thing, and I'm glad we had the courage, the moral courage, to come out on the side of the British, who were standing alone, supported, of course, by their Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. But it didn't look like we were going to win.
Do you remember as a kid growing up in Brooklyn, a lot of what was then called the America First movement, a lot of isolationist feeling?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in Yorkville, there was the Germans who were pro-German.
The Bund.
The Bund. And I remember, oh gosh, you bring up something very sore point. It really made my parents feel terrible to listen to Father Coughlin spewing out these hateful things about being Jewish. Oh gosh, how could he do this? How could he do this? He's saying things that aren't true, my parents would say, and I saw how bad it made them feel. And yet we still felt that America wouldn't listen to a guy like him, and wouldn't listen to Lindbergh, who was so pro-German, and Kennedy, the first Kennedy, Jack Kennedy's father,
Right.
Joe Kennedy, who was saying England is going to lose. We would do our best to be on the right side and try to prevail. I felt very strongly about the country as an American unit. And today, I feel that even at the topmost level, we seem to be apologizing for being an American to other countries. And appeasing. We're appeasing again. The way Chamberlain was appeasing Germany and saying, Herr Hitler is a man you can deal with. We can't deal with these Islamic terrorists. They have a religious imperative, and a religious imperative, well, they'll carry through to the death. And either they're killed first or we're killed first. I really think that's what we're going to be facing.
How do you think World War II, other than sort of the educational benefit, which I agree is immense, and the GI Bill, I agree with you that the GI Bill transformed this country, but how did your experiences in the war change you?
Well, it opened my eyes to what an extraordinarily powerful country this was. That within 2 years, we could be producing thousands of planes from scratch, almost, where we previously produced a few hundred. Now it's thousands, and tens of thousands of tanks, and tens of thousands of war material of all sorts, and material in general of all sorts. And we could change almost on a dime from consumer manufacturing to war manufacturing, sinew and armaments, planes, guns, and then after the war, go back to that. What a nimble, wonderful country this is, to be able to adapt. The country could adapt. And today, I think there's a feeling that this country is politically unable to adapt and compromise to a good end. That there are feelings so strong on one side and the other that neither will compromise. I worry about that. And I think we had a compromising government I think, then, and a great president, Truman. Oh, what a guy!
Did
You ever
like-
read his histories?
No.
His
Not yet.
biography? Oh, what a wonderful man.
More so than Roosevelt?
No, they were both good, but Truman is closer to me. I don't know if Roosevelt could understand me as much as Truman could. I'm from Truman's kind of a background. I'm not from Roosevelt's kind of background.
Understood. Although it's interesting, you talked about the unity in the country during World War II.
Yeah,
And of course, yesterday was the 11th anniversary of
yeah,
the terror attacks on the World Trade Center. We just September 11th, and I'm not sure this is a fair comparison, but people said the country came together after 9/11.
yes, I think it did.
But could
It
you
was somewhat of the same feeling.
right?
We were attacked,
You think
and I saw it firsthand.
you did? Where were you?
Yes. I was at the park in Irvington, which juts out into the river.
In Irvington, New York. Where were
Irvington, New York, and you could see right down the river to the Twin Towers. Carol and I were in a gas station, and we had the radio on before getting gas, and we heard, and this was around 8 o'clock in the morning, early in the morning.
8:46, right?
Okay, and we heard, oh, a plane has gone into one of the World Trade Towers. I thought it was a little plane off course or something
Right.
happened, and I had no idea. So let's go to the park and see, because we could see the World Trade Towers, the two of them,
Sure.
and it was a clear day. You could see right down the river, everything. And we could down there, go into the park, walk out to where it juts out into the river. One of the towers is smoking, smoke going up to the sky. A little plane can't do that. A little plane, no. And then we're looking and look. The second tower is hit.
You actually saw
By
it?
another- yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Something is going on. Something is going on. And this one is smoke coming up. So I said, let's go back to the house and we'll look on TV. The news will be on and they'll tell us what's happening. Something is happening that we don't. Drove back to the house, watching TV. Both towers come down. And the news, it still doesn't have the full story. They're questioning what happened. And then we heard all flights are told to be grounded across the country. And then we heard later in the day there's a flight went into the not later in the day, but
Right.
on the radio later, that a flight had gone into the Pentagon. And then we heard about the one in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Oh, we were attacked. Those cowardly bastards. They didn't care who they killed. They weren't going after a target of military significance. They were going after the United States of America and a symbol of it with people. And it made me very angry.
Was that the way you felt in December 7th, 41, when you heard
Yes.
about Pearl Harbor?
Yes,
The same
I
sort of
did. I did. Well, I felt, even before about Germany that way.
Sure.
And I thought the German and Japanese combination was a very strong one. Very strong. And they had destroyed our fleet at Pearl Harbor. I didn't know that until later. That
Sure.
completely destroyed. But I felt, what a combination. Hitler on land and Japan fleet, boy. Formidable.
You keep up with any of your former?
Yeah.
You're
I,
active in the reunion.
355th Fighter Group Association. I became a president for a while. I'm now, what do they call it? President Emeritus? Emeritus?
Emeritus.
Yeah. I'm a second VP now. But we're having a reunion in Dayton. October 6th, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th,
Mm-hmm.
which is near the Wright-Patterson Museum, the Air Force Museum. Yeah, I keep up. Not many of us left,
Mm-hmm.
but our friendship's very strong.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very strong. Those that are left.
Mm-hmm.
And the new ones, the Vietnam fellows, who of the 355th, ours is one of the few fighter groups that still carries the unit into the active duty today.
Mm-hmm.
And Vietnam, those fellows I thought were terribly, badly treated after what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Terribly treated. Totally unlike us. We were lauded,
Mm-hmm.
and they were vilified. Awful, awful.
Did you get any sort of a march when you
What?
came? You didn't get any sort. I mean, you know.
Did I march?
No,
somewhere?
any sort of celebration, any sort of victory celebration when you mustered out.
Myself?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
When I got off the boat, when we came back, off the boat, I had 2 big bags, and I went to the subway and I went home. Believe it or not.
And how old were you?
I wasn't yet 21. Yeah,
And you moved back in with your mom and dad?
my dad had died,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a terrible thing. I saw him die before I went overseas.
Mm-hmm. But your mom was there.
My mom moved into a little apartment, and I came back. I came back to that, and it wasn't the same without Dad.
Mm-hmm.
I could feel it, Yeah.
Did he die suddenly? Was it a?
I got a call at Perry, Florida, or rather a telegram came to Perry, to me, and then I showed it to the commanding officer, and it asked me to come home right away, that Dad had a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me a week's leave,
Mm-hmm.
and it was arranged. I caught a B-25 bomber
Mm-hmm.
going up to Mitchell Field, and I came into the house that night, and he was sinking,
Mm-hmm.
and I held his hand,
Mm-hmm.
and he died right in front of my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe he knew I was holding his hand, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know what they did, the doctor? He took a syringe, a huge syringe, and he plunged it into his heart. It was like a dagger.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad let out a groan. Yeah, I still hear it a lot. What a way to go. In
Mm-hmm.
pain.
Mm-hmm.
Good man.
Mm-hmm.
My pop, my dad. Yeah.
Well, it's quite a story. Any we've been talking. Any last words for the right now that you want to? I want to do another tape of showing some of your artifacts and some of your photos, but
Okay.
just before we'll take a little break. But do you have any last words you'd like to say?
Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks a lot. I hope you get a lot of guys who will give their stories. I've given some of mine. It's not everything. I can't think of it offhand. Everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's very worthwhile that younger people know the history of some of these events in the past, because without World War II we wouldn't exist today if we hadn't prevailed. And that's why I think I emphasize it was a near thing. It was in doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish history were taught today that doesn't have the revisionism of Dresden and the atomic bomb dropping, which I think was justified. to end the war sooner. Otherwise, I think we would have lost an enormous number of
Right.
men attacking Japan homeland.
Were elements of your squadron actually transferred to Japan, though?
No, we transferred to Germany.
Okay.
Yeah. But some of the pilots who did go to Japan, some of the pilots,
Mm-hmm.
very few, mostly transferred to the Army of Occupation in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and then were demobbed there,
Gotcha.
back here.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. Okay, we're back with Bill Lyons. I've asked you just to talk a little bit about these photos you have of your time in service, and there's a picture of a P-51, and I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. P-51.
Hold it so the camera can see. There you go. There you go.
And this was Fred Haviland's plane, Captain Fred Haviland. He was my flight leader on the mission November 26, 1944. And as you can see, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He had 7 planes that he shot down in the air at that time. You can tell by these little crosses. And as you can see, the plane looks like it's going forward, even though it's just in a picture. It was so beautifully streamlined and sleek that it was something beautiful to behold in this as it flew. And if you had seen it actively flown, you would have seen it flew like a bird.
Question for you. That's a P-51D with a bubble canopy.
Yes. Yeah.
What protection did you have behind you in that?
Oh, there's this, maybe you can see, there's a little piece of armor plate in back of your head.
And that was it, basically.
That's it. Yeah.
Because the rest of the aircraft is aluminum, right?
Yes, sure. The rest of the aircraft, you might say, is very frail, except for the inner. They're not beams exactly. It's like a cage inside of steel strips that are that the aluminum cladding is attached to. But they were and then in the wings there would be a beam running from the end of the wing through the center line of the plane out to the other wing, and that was the strongest part of the plane.
Mm-hmm. Show us the picture of your plane now. There's Tiger. Your plane was Tiger's Revenge.
This was my plane, Tiger's Revenge. I got this right after the November 26th mission, and as you can see, here's an external wing tank that I referred to in my remarks.
Mm-hmm.
And under here is the other external wing tank, 210-gallon tanks. These tanks were to be jettisoned upon entering combat, and they, as I said, had no gas gauges, so you couldn't tell how much gas you was using up from them, except based on timing and what your revolutions per minute of the prop were against that timing, and how long and the time itself.
What was the maximum fuel load you could take?
469 gallons is what you took off with, and there was no in-air refueling, hadn't been invented yet, so what you took off with is all the fuel you got. There was no place to refuel in the air, and this is what extended the range so far, because it doubled 210 gallon. Two 110-gallon tanks. That's 220 gallons, and you had a total of 469. So you just about doubled your range with these external tanks.
What was the maximum range you could fly? What was the maximum radius that you could fly?
1,250 miles. Round trip.
Round trip.
Right, 625 each way. You could stretch it a little by leaning back your mixture and having lower RPM, but then you would fly slower. But you could stretch your time in the air by doing that. Someone asked me once, well, couldn't you glide? The P-51 didn't go very well when you had the engine off, and when you were with the throttle pulled back and gliding, because it glided at a very steep angle.
You wanted to keep that prop turning.
Yes. Okay.
Show us some of the other pictures now. You have a couple pictures of you as a
This one?
whichever one you want. Show first.
Oh, this is a picture that was taken the first day that you arrived at Steeple Morden, and it was taken. This is in a very small snapshot, and this is a blow up of it. But it's interesting to see some of the things that you can tell from this blow up. This is the oxygen mask, and this is your microphone that you speak through when your oxygen mask is on, connected to the radio intercom with all the rest of the flight and squadron and group. And you very sparingly spoke over that when in the air. Only the most necessary communication was done, such as that you see enemy planes, or you talk about flak and where it is located, with reference to other guys in your squadron, so that flak doesn't come up behind them, and they will be able to pull out of the way you warn them. This is, see this, what looks like a tube?
Mm-hmm.
That is a tube, then it's connected to your Mae West inflated vest.
Life vest.
Which if you land, or if you bail out over water, the North Sea, English Channel, and your Mae West doesn't fill up by any chance, you take out this tube and blow it up. And what else?
And
you notice I'm wearing a tie? Most guys wore a tie when they flew. Very few wore the white scarf, but all the people in the movies wore white scarves. However, a white scarf would get in the way. The tie was useful if you were ever had to bail out and needed something to tie something with. Let's see what else. These are the RAF goggles. They were flat plane goggles and smoked a little bit, which you put on to be able to see better into the sun, or because it was a bright day. And most of the fellows in my squadron wore the RAF flat plane goggles because they didn't distort with a curve in the glass. These are the gloves.
Those gloves
and
are very serious gloves.
Yeah. This is the leather gauntlet, which was worn on top of the silk inner glove, which was worn on top of the chamois inner glove on your hand. This is the tube. The oxygen came up through into the mask, mm-hmm. And you wouldn't have anything where your skin was showing up high, 26, in the 20s and above 1,000 feet, because it would freeze. Your eyes were covered and your face was covered by the oxygen mask. Nothing was open.
That would cover your chin too.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. Well, as you can see, yeah. Mm-hmm. Nothing was open because it was so cold up there that if you took your gloves off, your hand would immediately be so cold you would be holding it out into 60 degree below temperature. And of course, you don't do that. What else? These are the earphones, mm-hmm. inside the helmet, as you can see a little bit. And what else do you want to know?
I think that's enough. I think you have another photo there. But you explained to me that,
Oh.
that the photo that you just showed was taken the first day you arrived
Yes.
at the base, because
Yeah.
in case you were lost, basically,
Yeah,
right?
this
They'd have
wasn't taken before a flight.
Mm-hmm.
This was taken as a posed shot, and it was taken in case you were lost on your first mission. And also, it was taken by the base photographer when, if you would shoot down a plane, word would go out to your local newspapers with your picture and a description of what the combat was that day that you were involved in. And it was a funny thing. Should I tell this?
Sure.
Okay. My mom and I were always telling fibs to each other in the letters that we wrote back and forth. And I never told her that, of course, that I was ever in any combat. I would always tell her that I was going to London that day, or going to the English countryside, the Cotswolds, or playing ping pong, or the officers' club, or we saw a movie. Never telling her anything about missions. And she, of course, was never telling me that she had gotten a job at the big Brooklyn Army base in Bay Ridge when I left in order to make some extra money, and never telling me what she was reading in the newspapers. So, on November 26th, I shot down an ME-109, and this picture went out to the local papers in Brooklyn, the Hometown News, and Brooklyn Daily Eagle, I guess. And Mom read it, and she never told me she read it. She kept her side quiet insofar as telling me that she knew I was in combat. And it wasn't until after I returned that we confessed to each other that we were both telling fibs about what we were doing, and we had a wonderful laugh. Wonderful. It was a great reunion, just spilling out what we could at that time when I returned. This picture, I don't know if you can see these sprocket marks, sprockets here, sprocket.
Hold it a little lower. Little lower. That's good. Okay, go ahead.
Can you see these sprocket marks?
I think they come through.
Well, if you can't, I'm going to try to describe it. This is motion picture film, but it's motion picture film taken from the gun camera. There's a gun camera in the wing adjacent to the 3 guns that, when the guns are fired, the camera shoots film, motion picture, 16 millimeter motion picture. And this picture was taken on the ground, of course, by the crew chief, taking out the gun camera from the wing and moving it 1 frame at a time so he can shoot a still picture of me. This was taken after my first shoot down of an ME-109 when I got out of the plane. That's all. Is there any more?
I think
What else?
I think we got them all. I think those are the ones.
P-51. Oh, I'm on the wing of a P-51 here. That's all. Nothing special. Okay.
All right. Thank you again.
You're welcome.